Hello and welcome to the 2 Minute Drill podcast. We are continuing on with the edge rusher and linebacker discussion. Today, we're talking about the sleepers that we have at both positions, and we got some exciting ones in store for you today. But before we dive into any of it, Dean Bruce is by my side. Dean, how are you doing today?
I'm pretty good. I'm excited to talk about the guys we've got lined up. Feels like a good batch.
Yeah, so without further ado, why don't you go ahead and take us away with the number one sleeper for you?
Yeah, I think number one sleeper for me is going to be Jared Ivey out of Ole Miss. Super explosive, big guy who I think should have great straight line speed for his size. Really big. I think he's coming in around 265, 270. Expect him to be like an RAS darling because of that size, length, height, athleticism combined. Good power rusher with strong enough explosive traits to, I think, catch eyes in the scouting process. And he operates competently as both a run stopper and a pass rusher. I thought his run stopping was especially strong with his anchor and changing speed. I think that Ivey was doing a lot of rotation in and out of his defensive line, but so maybe his motor could come into question. But I think he's going to have a big year at Ole Miss. I think this is going to be sort of his coming out year after sort of like being in that rotation for about like 5 years. I think he's sort of ready to be a premier edge rusher for a team, and I think he'll be that guy for Ole Miss.
Yeah, I was somewhat impressed with him because he has that nice frame, 6'5", 285 is the way he's listed at. I'm thinking that he could kind of vary each way, and it wouldn't really hurt him that much. I don't know. It's just he's got good size regardless of what he comes in at, unless he's pulling like a Braylon Trice where he's like 40 pounds under what some people are projecting for him. So I'm excited for Ivy, especially now on a defensive line where he's going to be working with maybe like a Walter Nolan inside of him, and it's going to kind of just be power with power that's attacking offensive lines. It's very hard to kind of make up for that on an offensive line. And that's going to benefit Ivy and this Ole Miss defense. Overall, I felt like his get off was a little questionable, and I think that hurts him whenever it comes to getting into the backfield and making consistent plays on the football. And it's not necessarily that I think he's a bad athlete. It's just there were so many times where he was late to kind of get out of his stance at the snap. I think he's got great size. I think he's got nice play strength. I think the technical side is still a work in progress, but there's definitely traits there and flashes to where I definitely am also intrigued in Ivy, and I'm excited to see what he can do in 2024.
Yeah, I think that his timing could be a little better, but I think once he gets into that stance, he pounces so well that I'm hoping that it's just sort of a mental thing.
Yeah, and I think coaches will be willing to kind of take that bet as well. But I'm going to move forward now to my first sleeper, and I'm going to go with Fadil Diggs, the transfer going from Texas A&M to Syracuse, following along with a lot of transfers going to the Orange, and what could be a surprisingly impressive season for the Syracuse football team. But Fadil Diggs was someone that was operating as an outside linebacker for the Aggies. Didn't get a lot of pass rush opportunities, but still put up 4 sacks on the season. This was a defensive line that had Shamar Turner, Walter Nolan, Shamar Stewart. Like there was a ton of pieces on that defensive line to where they were able to stick with their down line and rushing. So the guys that were working off ball were usually dropping into coverage because they had that kind of luxury, and the pass defense already had its issues in the secondary. I think in this year with the Syracuse football team, he's going to be having an opportunity to work more as a pass rusher off the edge, be one of the premier guys that are attacking the quarterback, and I think he's going to take a massive step forward when it comes to production. 6'4", 256 pounds. And I think that versatility now, working so much into coverage, dropping back, is going to kind of benefit him in the long run. But I do think it's kind of hindered his ability to kind of elevate his stock in the overall draft class where there's so many guys that are kind of on the map already and on scouts radars. Maybe Diggs is on scouts radars, but I don't know. When it comes to the media rankings, he's usually kind of left out or left near the bottom. And I think he's someone that could really kind of elevate his name through the process and through a strong season.
Yeah, I think moving out of Texas A&M is going to be good for him. I really liked his hands. I thought when he was able to hit the pass rush snaps, he was able to like generate some good shock. I thought when he moved into coverage, he was okay. I was a little unmoved by his athleticism for a guy who was dropping into coverage, which I think kind of soured me on him a little. But I think getting out of Texas A&M will be good for him, and moving over to Syracuse with Fran Brown's defense, who has been able to draw guys to the team just based on the fact that he's a great recruiter, and two, he's coming from a team like Georgia with like stacked defensive talent and great talent development. So if he can transfer some of that over to Syracuse, I think Diggs could be in for a really good year, especially if he gets more stand-up edge rushing snaps as opposed to having to drop into coverage all the time. I think the length is also probably decent enough. I saw he was coming in around 33 inches, and I think he can probably get some run, especially in an ACC. It feels like there's some of the teams are a little weaker at the offensive line than I would say in the SEC, and definitely a little like more on the 300-pound end as opposed to like the 320-pound end. So I think this will be a good time for Diggs to pop off and really generate some stats outside of his rotational stuff, because I think he's doing well for a rotational player. If he can scale up to being that premier pass rusher for Syracuse, he's in for a potential double-digit sack season.
Yeah, it'll be exciting to watch. But why don't you go ahead and reveal number 2 sleeper for you for today?
Yeah, let's stick in the ACC. Let's go to the other side of the country though. Xavier Carlton. I think Xavier Carlton, what intrigued me about him is his frame, 6'5", 270 pounds, I believe. More of a body projection, but I thought his length and power were pretty freaky. Has some decent quickness on him, but I liked that he plays a little bit of everywhere. He's able to move inside. I saw him drop into coverage a couple times, and he sets that edge really well as a run stopper. I think he needs to have better speed to be truly a game changer at edge, but I think he's a guy who's going to play some hybrid 5 tech in the league. Really, what stood out to me is this is the kind of guy that the Cowboys draft in the 3rd round every year. Like, not the type of player who's like super darling by media, but just guys who seem to really love to fit into that scheme. I watched him. I was like, yeah, that's a Dan Quinn guy for sure. If he ends up on the Commanders, I'm like, okay, yeah, sure, why not? Because he's very big, he's very strong. He doesn't quite have the athleticism that I'd hope for, but I thought his lateral agility and kind of general, I think he's quicker than he is fast, if that makes sense. So I'm hoping that this season he can learn to use his length a little better, because it is coming in pretty well. I think he's upper 34s, maybe low 35s. So if he can do that, if he can also show some of that defensive versatility where he's able to play a little bit inside, I think that'll do well for him. I think he's a guy who like probably is going to stick around bottom of day 3, but if I'm picking guys at bottom of day 3 right now that I got to watch on the edge rushing team, Xavier Carlton's probably the guy I'm choosing in that late round flyer range. It'll be interesting to see where his stock ends up stabilizing.
Yeah, 47 hurries last year really showed some flash that wasn't necessarily there in his past 3 seasons with the California Golden Bears. So I think there's that potential, or I guess he was with California and Utah, but yeah, so it was a huge 2023 campaign, and now he has a chance to really kind of prove that that's going to be consistent play. I thought he struggled when it came to bend and leverage. I think that's the big issue for him. Even if he's not going to be as bendy, he has a size where you're kind of okay with that, but he needs to be better at getting down, getting lower into his stance, and firing into contact with more of his base behind him. And I think when you're so high up in the air, you're losing so much of that force and driving ability to kind of set back your blocker. So there's too many plays where he was neutralized, but I think there's potential there to kind of take those next steps. I want to see more of him as an athlete, but that pass rush production and the flashes are there. It's now converting that into sacks and just kind of taking those next steps in terms of refinement and skill.
Totally agree.
Yeah, so now my second sleeper, I'm going to roll with Joyner, the edge rusher out of Michigan, a guy that I have actually had on my radar a little bit. This is another guy that I'm going to, he's on maps now, so I don't feel as accomplished telling you about now, but Joyner is someone that had like 1 sack, and I was watching and I was like, man, this guy has incredible get off. I hope they can kind of elevate his play because I feel stupid hyping him, but he did it. So now I'm all in on him. He's a guy from Minnesota that I think is going to be extremely exciting. He has, like I said, impressive get off, and that jolty, bursty ability is going to be so exciting once he kind of works into a defense, especially in the NFL, where I think he's going to get a better opportunity as a 3-4 outside linebacker, more stand-up rush opportunities. I think he's going to kind of get to showcase more of that athleticism around the edge. His great bend, great fluidity in his lower half, that short area jolt that really kind of overwhelms blockers at the point of attack. He's someone that I'm really excited for, and I think the growth from 2022 to 2023 was there. If he can take another step forward into 2024, he's going to be someone that's going to be highly coveted by NFL teams.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like we've talked about this guy like in the background before, Joyner. I think he's been on our radars for a very long time. I'll vouch for you there. We've sort of been picking up with him. As I was sad to see him on your sleeper list. I would have used him. But yeah, I totally agree. He's an incredibly explosive athlete. I think he gets a lot of like credit for his lateral agility, but I think that explosiveness is really what defines him as a stand-up rusher. I think he's an incredible pass rusher. I think he has some like trouble converting that like those hurries into sacks at times, because he's a little bit of a I would say wild in terms of body control, like just a little bit frenzied, kind of a runaway train type player. But if he can sort of steady himself and continue that quick movement speed, I think Joyner is going to be a guy who we're talking about as a big time edge rusher. I also want to see him a little better as a run stopper and an edge setter, because I found like at times he was losing the leverage battle and getting bullied at the point of attack. But I think that's just going to come with like a couple more years in the strength lab and maybe that jump to the NFL where he's just building up his uppers. I mean, he's already got a great body and a great frame with good muscle on it. I think it's just a matter of time before he, gets his hands lower and is able to figure that stuff out. It's one of those things that just tends to come together in the NFL. I think Joyner this year, if he can put up some impressive sack numbers and maybe up those TFLs a little. I remember he'd kind of been a little disappointing in terms of that there, especially for a guy who was playing a little bit of defensive tackle inside for Minnesota. But I think his potential is really high, and I think it's good that media's catching on to him now.
Yeah, don't sleep on the Gophers. They have a lot of guys that really could be real NFL draft prospects. And sometimes that collection of talent really kind of converts into a stronger season than many are expecting, similar to Missouri last year. But go ahead and reveal sleeper number 3 for yourself, Dean.
Yeah, I will throw RJ Oben out there. We talked about a guy who's transferring from Texas A&M. Oh wait, no, hold on. RJ Oben is transferring from an Elko team in Duke
Duke.
to Notre Dame. There we go. There, I was trying to figure out why I wrote Texas A&M down in my notes. It's because of the Elko connection. He's a twitched up. RJ Oben is coming from Duke to Notre Dame, and I think he's going to sort of take over a role similar to Isaiah Foskey in that sort of defense. I know it's been a couple of years removed for Foskey, and he hasn't quite panned out the way I would have wanted him to. But they kind of fill the same type of deal in being a twitched up pass rusher with an explosive first step, who have some good pass rush skill in terms of like what I would consider to be balanced strength and speed. And I felt like Oben was pretty consistent about generating highlight reel plays at Duke, where he was, really utilizing the spin move over and over again. I felt like the one issue I had with Oben last year was that he was kind of a one move pass rusher. But as he moves over to Notre Dame, a team that's pretty consistent about pumping out defensive linemen and really refining their technicals, I felt like we got that experience from Foskey's year to year growth. I think RJ Oben's going to be a little past the type of guy who's just spamming that spin move over and over again and becoming more of a guy who's able to rip and chop and keep his momentum going forward so he can show off that great closing speed. If I'm Marcus Freeman, I'm taking some time to teach him some new pass rush moves so he can utilize his pretty solid athleticism. I don't think he's like a game wrecker there or anything, but I think he's a good enough athlete to where once he kind of gets away from that spin move that kind of throws him a little bit of a slower run off in the finishing game, I think he's going to be someone who we're looking at and is like, oh, this guy was more explosive than we were giving credit for. And he was able to translate his success at Duke, which was, kind of an ACC like middle feeder who was just sort of a surprising team because of how good Elko was, to a team like Notre Dame who's probably got like playoff expectations. I think if Notre Dame's a playoff team, Oben's going to be a big part of it.
Yeah, and he's definitely going to be a big part of that Fighting Irish defense. I liked Oben as an athlete. I thought he was solid, similar to you, but I think I was a little lower on his twitch. I think that short area burst is what kind of holds him back from breaking into that next tier. He's got solid size, 6'4", 255 pounds. He can kind of play a stand-up or with a hand in dirt, and he has physicality and kind of high motor ability to make it work in either factor. He's someone that I think, 6-year senior, so obviously there's that kind of capping his maybe potential when it comes to this edge class where there's so many guys that are younger and have that like higher upside, I guess. But still, Oben's someone that has been a steady producer now for 2 seasons, probably going to be a 3rd season now. And I think that really speaks volumes for teams when they're looking to acquire depth in that like day 2, early day 3 type of range that I think Oben could really kind of fall into. I wrote down like a like day 3 grade, probably in the back half of that day 3 range, but this is someone that with a strong season at a very high end program like Notre Dame, if they're able to make the playoffs, make some noise in the postseason, I think Oben definitely can get a bump from that. And he's someone that is going to be on radars for most of the draft process.
Yeah, I probably put him down as about a 4th, but yeah, let's move on to who's your 2nd or 3rd sleeper we got going.
Yeah, so for my 3rd sleeper, I'm going to go with Jordan Burch, a defensive end for Oregon that is just, I mean, do it all when you're looking for edge rushers. This is someone that transferred from South Carolina, and I feel like from his South Carolina days, I've been high on the guy because he's 6'4", 294 pounds. And this is someone that can kind of work inside, outside, similar to the Shamar Stewart and Keon White kind of conversations that we had. Shamar Turner, I mean, sorry. Conversations that we had where it's just like that athleticism, size, power, and just raw, natural like ability to make splash plays is always there. He's someone that, you kind of expect him to be big and powerful, but you wouldn't expect the lateral ability, his range to kind of work out towards the sideline and track down the ball carrier. But he has that open field speed to where he's able to contribute in a multitude of ways for this Oregon defense. He transferred to Oregon last year, and early on, he kind of struggled out of the gates to where a lot of people were saying, he's just not taking that step. But in that back half of the year, he really started to catch fire, be more consistent as a contributor, and he really established himself as a key piece of that defense. Returns in 2024, and I think he's going to be a leader to start out the season. And I think he's in for a big year to really kind of establish himself, put himself on the map. And I mean, there's real round one potential here for Jordan Burch.
Oh yeah, incredible athlete. I felt like, I mean, he's stronger and more athletic than he is productive, but I think he's going to be a guy who's benefiting from that refresher of like the narratives from week 1 through 5 of last year are pretty much out of the minds of many now. I think Jordan Burch had a strong end to the season. I totally agree. And I think a lot of his athleticism has been talked about. I think he showed up on Feldman's. I think he's going to be talked about in a lot of conversations in these round one mocks because the athleticism is just so obvious early. He jumps off the ball. Even with that big 290 pounds, he's still going to run like he's going to run you harried with the rest of them. I mean, like I think he's got big time upside. I feel like we've been seeing flashes of it ever since he was at South Carolina making his rotational debut, and now he's kind of there in Oregon. I think he's going to be the like one of the guys who's ready to make that Oregon defense like into a playoff potential. I think at times Oregon's defensive line was a little disappointing last year, partially because Burch wasn't taking the steps that he was. But I think Burch at 290 with the athleticism he has, there's no excuse for why this guy couldn't be a round one player as long as he can translate his big time athleticism into current production. Because that athleticism is there, the flashes are really there. I think he's sort of a guy who's his potential is as good as his highlight reel, and his highlight reel is phenomenal in my opinion. But it's going to be about game to game consistency and keeping that level up from the last half of the season up throughout the year. I think if he can start off the year strong, he'll be in the conversations for the whole year. I think he's going to benefit from a new season with new narratives.
Yeah, he's someone that I'm really high on. And I really want to buy into that potential. In the summer, it's a lot easier to do, but now he has to put it together in 2024. And if he does so, Oregon could be in for a very strong season. Even without him, they're probably going to be pretty good, though. But I think with Burch, it just could really kind of elevate that team. But Dean, sleeper number 4, go ahead and take it away.
Yeah, let's kick it to Illinois with Seth Coleman. He's more of an outside linebacker type guy. He's an undersized, but really, I thought he was pretty productive edge on who showed his best skill against Iowa. I felt like that was the highlight game I got for him. He was able to work the hands of really proficient offensive tackles over at Iowa. Their offensive line isn't as good as it has been, but Connor Colby's still a guy who I was impressed that he got good reps off of against. He has good speed. I think part of it's because he's playing at 245 pounds, but I think he's got good speed where he's closing in on guys, getting these TFLs, getting these sacks. And I think that good athleticism, as well as a good set of technical moves behind him, is going to really carry his stock upwards in the next season. I think that whole Illinois D line is pretty solid. I think they're going to benefit from a couple years of more development with these guys. And I know we're talking about an Illinois guy in a second, not to spoil, but I expect higher production from Seth Coleman than maybe the other Illinois guy, just because he's a little more technically refined and is able to, chop better than the other edge rusher we'll be talking about. And I also think that putting on 10 pounds, I saw a listing where he was sitting at 255 as opposed to the 245 pounds he was playing at last year. I think that'll be good for him because I think when he was dropping into coverage and doing that kind of work, he wasn't as strong as he was playing at edge. So I think shifting full time to being a rush outside linebacker, sort of a weak side guy, is going to be good for him. I expect high production from him at Illinois, and I expect him to be one of the names taken off the board in day 3, where we're like looking for scheme fits for these littler guys who are pretty speedy and good technicals. So I think I almost saw a little bit of Javon Solomon in him, who was a guy I was pretty high on last year. So I'm excited for him. I think this is going to be a good year for Seth Coleman and for Illinois as a whole.
Yeah, he's a versatile edge rusher, and he's really nice in the open field. I would agree that the weight would be nice if he adds it because that point of attack power is really where I'm kind of lacking with Coleman, and that is what holds me back on buying into him completely. But I really like him. I think he's still like a really nice stand-up rusher in the 3-4 defense. I think he's perfectly suited for it. Getting that opportunity to kind of drop into coverage, work with a little bit of build-up behind his rush, and I think that can help him generate some power, and that would help him get to the backfield. He's someone that's been steady and dependable for Illinois. That front seven has been like just one of the more underrated units in college football. Jerzon Newton's gone, so obviously the edge rushers are going to have to take a big step forward and kind of become the leaders of the unit. But overall, I think Coleman has a lot to like in his game, and I think there's going to be someone early day 3 that's going to love his skill set and say, look, this is someone that we can easily plug in as a backup with potential to become a starter. And I think they'll get some nice value for at least dependable depth play on the roster. But I like both Illinois edge rushers, and that's why sleeper number 4, I'm going with Gabe Jacas, 6'3", 270 pounds. But if you watch this guy in the open field, I mean, he looks like he's like 220. This guy has excellent fluidity and just lower half speed. That burst and bend around the corner is something that I really look for in guys. And especially when you're 270 pounds and you're able to do that, I mean, there's just nothing that you could ask for that's more. He's got great size, and that leverage and just bend around the corner is something that I think is going to help him kind of take those next steps and flash as a pass rusher. I wanted to see a bigger step in terms of production last season. He started his freshman year, and I think he had like 4 sacks. I have the numbers right here. Yeah, 4 sacks last year as well. So it was like 4 sacks in 2022. Thought everyone was kind of going to take that next step. Jacas sort of hovered around the same range with 4 sacks again in 2023. 2024, he's got to elevate it. I think, getting into at least that 6.5 plus sack range will put himself on the map and really establish what he can do off of the edge. He's someone that I think has potential. He's versatile as well. They have no issues dropping him into coverage. He's picked up receivers, he's picked up tight ends and running backs, and he's able to get downfield and track them deep as needed because the speed is there. Now it's just kind of putting together all the traits into consistent, steady, technically refined play. Easier said than done, but I do really like Gabe Jacas. And in year 3, sometimes it just takes a little longer to kind of take that next step when you're already so good. And I think that's on the table for Jacas in 2024.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think Jacas is a very high potential player. His hand usage and build really struck out to me, but especially that explosiveness and speed in the open field. When he was dropping into coverage, I totally agree. It was like seeing a guy who was meant to play middle linebacker, but then you push him downhill and it's like, oh yeah, of course. He's like 270. Yeah. Oh, duh, right. Forgot. Okay. Yeah, and I think as a finisher, he leaves a little bit to be desired just because like he doesn't quite have the tackling form of some of the other edge rusher guys I've watched this season. And I think I'm probably a little lower on his agility, like moving side to side and changing direction real quick and able to take on blockers who are sort of chained up, if that makes sense. Like he gets through one guy and has to carry on to a running back, and I think he loses a little bit of momentum just because he's not that incredible of a finisher with a motor. But I think ultimately Jacas is one of those guys where it's like, okay, sky's the limit. I also think he's kind of got a pretty decent pass rush bag, in my opinion. I was pleasantly surprised at the amount of like techniques he was using to get to the guy. And I think that kind of translates because Illinois was willing to line him up sort of at edge DT and drop him into coverage at middle linebacker. So he's used to operating in a lot of versatility. So I was very excited about watching Jacas, and I was like, okay, this is a guy who stands out to me on that Illinois defensive line. I think that whole Illinois defensive line is going to be another sought after unit after, the year Jerzon Newton had, and even Keith Randolph. Now that those two are gone, I think it's going to be Jacas and Coleman for me. I think those are going to be a great set of duos taking on that conference.
Yeah, Illinois has plenty of potential. And I agree with you. Both guys really have the upside, and just production in their profile, the play-to-play consistency, I think is still there, even though there are still steps to take. It's now just kind of proving yourself into that next tier to where you're an elite college football player, or at least flashes of elite traits, to where you can kind of sell yourself and really kind of elevate your draft stock. And I think both guys are draftable right now as is. So if they're able to take those steps, I'm going to be very excited for them as prospects. Now moving forward to the linebackers of our sleeper section, and we have 4 in store for you guys. Dean, why don't you go ahead and start us off with your first sleeper at the linebacker position?
Yeah, I think we're gonna take it to Iowa. I think there's gonna be a guy who's gonna be on radars for the NFL draft, Nick Jackson. Now he's paired with Jay Higgins over there at Iowa, and while I think Jay Higgins is probably going to get more of the attention on the college football level, I think Nick Jackson's probably the better NFL draft prospect. And that's why I'm sort of keying in on him as my sleeper. I don't know if he'll get the attention because Jay Higgins is going to be racking up tackles, but Nick Jackson is an incredible athlete. I first noticed him when he was playing at the University of Virginia. I think he's got great sideline to sideline speed, incredible range. He showed off incredible flashes of pass coverage. He's a former receiver, and you can tell with his speed and instincts and how much he understands how to play the ball. He also loves to play downhill, get some good run stops. I mean, just kind of a do-it-all linebacker. I was very excited about him coming into Iowa. I'm not shocked that Jay Higgins has sort of taken the headline position there because he fits more of the mold that Ferentz seems to like on that team. But I think Jackson's going to be ultimately the better NFL guy just because he's so much stronger of an athlete. I had him estimated in the 4.49 to like 4.52 range at about that speed, and I think Jackson's just going to be a guy who we're noticing every time he's on the field. He's going to get some good rotation in with Jay Higgins, and I think he's going to be a great fit at the next level. Sort of a like pass coverage hybrid. Like even think could play a little safety if he needs to, just because his tackling form is so strong. I'm just excited to have him on a team that's as exciting as Iowa. I think it's going to be a good year for that defense continued, and hopefully that offense can pick itself up.
Yeah, he's someone that I think plays with a lot of force as well. He's very aggressive, high motor going into blocks, and he really does so as a blitzer as well, to where he kind of sets back offensive linemen. You wouldn't expect that for a former receiver, but he's got some force behind his pads, and he has no shyness when it comes to going into contact. I really like his just physicality when it comes to playing snap to snap, and I think that Iowa defense is obviously going to be shut down all year because they just consistently are. But I don't know. It's something that I feel like the size is kind of a concern. 6 foot, 235 pounds is his listed size. And I think that could very easily be a little bit lower if he's like 5'11 and a half, maybe 229 or something like that. It wouldn't shock me. And I think that's going to create some issues and just overall limit his upside. But I mean, some defenses are willing to kind of take those smaller guys if they know the fight and play strength and force is there. And he definitely has that to offer. And that speed is definitely going to help him out as well.
Yeah, I think he's going to be a guy we're talking about sort of in that like third to fourth round range as a guy who's, got these great athletic traits and is able to still show great strength. If he can, get a little bigger, I think that'll be better for his game because he is such a forceful player. It can only get higher. So I'm excited for Nick Jackson.
Yeah, me as well. But moving forward to my first sleeper at the linebacker position, and that's Francisco Malinois. You may know his brother because he's a guy that gets hyped up as a true freshman right tackle for Miami. But Francisco Malinois is a guy you need to keep an eye on in this draft process. He's an exciting linebacker, 6'3", 230 pounds. And I think what I like most about him is that Miami routinely just put the defense and second level entirely on him. They'd have like 4 down linemen, 1 linebacker, spread out the rest of the defensive backs, and they'd say, yeah, whatever, we trust him. And it wouldn't cost them because Malinois is just an absolute stud. He's got the coverage instincts, the play recognition, the athleticism, and the size that I think checks every single box that you're looking for out of a linebacker. I think this guy's a total stud. I'm not going to throw out like some legendary linebacker names as a comparison, but I think when it comes to this draft class, there are so many guys that have hype right now that I think Malinois clears just entirely. I really love his game, and I think he's going to be someone that continues to elevate his play, elevates the Hurricanes in what I believe is going to be an ACC winning season for them. And I think Malinois is going to play a big role in that. And as a result, I expect him to fly up draft boards, start to garner more attention. And as the draft comes around, if he's in it, I think he's going to be someone that we are talking about in the first 3 rounds.
Yeah, I mean, I was shocked that Malinois showed up on was someone who we were still talking about as a potential sleeper because when I watched him, I was like, he's better than 3 of the guys we talked about the other day. Like, I think he's just a great all around player. He does really well in the pass rush, and the stats prove it. He was sitting at some of the highest rates of sacks for a linebacker, especially a guy who plays so much over the middle. I was very surprised that his sack numbers were that strong. I wasn't surprised once I saw him on the field, but looking at his profile, I'm like, what's he doing with like what I think it was like 6.5, 7.5
Yeah,
sacks?
6.5, I believe.
Yeah, it was crazy. I was like, oh my God. And then I turned it on and I'm like, oh, well, yeah, duh, because he's just an incredibly instinctual and like mentally strong linebacker who just keys into these plays super well. I mean, and he's got the sideline to sideline speed. He's just an ultimately like it was hard to find a flaw in his game because he's just so good at reading and reacting to plays. Like he immediately sees the field. He's like, okay, this is where the ball is going to go. I have to get there. I'm there. It's over. Like, and I've got the tackling for him to sort of compress in and sort of just like swallow up any ball carrier that came against him. I think that maybe like the only thing that I could like nag him on is he's not quite as athletic as some of the top guys, but it's nothing like there's nothing like deficient about his athleticism. I was just like, well, he's not a 4.4s guy. He's a high 4.5s, low 4.6s guy. It's not going to hurt him any. It might like catch him in a spot like when he's covering a little more athletic tight ends and running backs at the next level. But I think his like mental game is good enough to make up for that. I was very happy watching him. I think he's probably going to come in as a top 3 linebacker for me ultimately if he can keep this up.
Yeah, I'm very excited for him. But go ahead and reveal your second linebacker sleeper.
Yeah, and I'm going to talk about Ruben Hyppolite. I thought Ruben Hyppolite was someone who flashed to me in a couple Maryland games. He has like great range for a will linebacker, and I felt like he had really good instincts as well. Like very much someone who I felt like was very good at stopping the run and could still catch bodies in the pass coverage game. He's also a very strong tackler. I felt like he wasn't missing much, and he could do it all on his own. I felt like he's I don't know his length off the top of my head. I didn't do enough research, but it felt like it was proficient enough to have a good tackling form and get these guys in open field. I was very impressed by just sort of his stoutness and like strength. I think like he's not as flashy as some of the other guys on the list. He's just sort of a guy who picks up good tackles, is able to be in the right place at the right time, and is able to sort of, get from sideline to sideline in a way that was, proficient and stood out on a Maryland team. But I think we're going to be looking at a guy like Hyppolite to carry that Maryland defense, who I don't think has a lot of like great defensive players. And I think if there's one guy who's going to rack up tackles on that team, it's going to be Ruben Hyppolite. I would like to see a little bit better athleticism if he can pick up his speed a little bit going in, and just generally, he doesn't quite have a standout skill like I hoped he would. Just sort of had some good plays where I was like, these are heads up plays. This is what I'm looking for in a linebacker in terms of diagnostics. But if he can sort of pick up some strength, and a little bit of more speed behind him, get his wheels going, I think we'll be looking at Hyppolite as sort of a guy you can take a day three flyer on.
Yeah, and I think that cleanup ability in the run game is what makes him so valuable for the Maryland defense. With Barham transferring out, he's going to be the main guy in that second level, and I think he's going to have to elevate his play. But I really kind of look at that run defense and that instincts and that high motor ability, and it helps him out a ton when it comes to just being dependable in that second level. And that's sometimes all you need. Teams like the Colts and the Rams, they kind of just look for those run defenders that are going to be able to kind of just mop up duty, make sure that nothing kind of breaks forward, limit the 5 and 7 yard carries, and kind of limit it to those 3 2 yard carries to where these teams are forced into third and longs. And that's sometimes all you need out of your linebacker position. And I think that's what Hyppolite has to offer for a lot of teams. Probably not a guy that we're going to be talking about in the top of this linebacker class ever. No offense to him, but I do think that there is value for him in the NFL level to where that 6'4", 240 pound frame really comes out, and that run defense is going to provide value where some teams are definitely going to be considering him on day 3 of this draft.
Yeah, I mean, I think both those Maryland guys are going to be guys we're talking about. I think now that especially that Barham's moving to Michigan.
Yeah, and speak of the devil, my last sleeper, I'm going to go with Jaishawn Barham, a transfer from Maryland to Michigan. He's going to be doing cleanup duty behind Kenneth Grant and Mason Graham. So he's going to have maybe the easiest job in all of college football, but he is just so good at taking on contact, working through traffic. He's so strong, 6'3", 250 pounds, great size, great play strength. The lower half is what I love most because I just feel like this guy never gets stalled when he goes into blocks, and it helps him make a play on the football. He is so good at IDing the play. And I don't think he's necessarily the greatest open field coverage guy, so you're not going to have him working like 15 yards deep, carrying the tight end down the seam as much. But I still think he has that athleticism in his tool set. He's someone that's great physicality, great play strength, and just great ability to kind of lay down some wood as a tackler, to where I think this guy is an absolute stud. Probably similar to Danny Stutzman in terms of that old school kind of traditional linebacker, but man, there's not a lot of prospects that come in just looking like a day one ready Mike. This guy absolutely does, and I think he's going to clean up at Michigan.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think if you're playing behind that good of a defensive line, you have basically no excuse. But I think Barham's coming in with a very strong set of skills. I totally agree that leg drive, he was always keeping those legs turning when he was doing those pass rush snaps. And even when he was like, dropping back into coverage, while it wasn't his best trait, I felt like he operated better as a run stopper and a pass rusher. He was still fast enough and like taking these big enough strides to where he was able to carry a lot of really competent players across the defense. I mean, I would like him to probably stick more close to the middle as opposed to operating and dropping completely into coverage. But I think he's got very fluid snaps and very fluid reps where he shows potential as a coverage guy as well. I think there's some times where I would like him to have a few better instincts when he's in the coverage game or even as a run stopping guy. I think at times he picks up the wrong block or he gets bit on by a fake or a play action. But I think there's going to be a lot of foundation to build off of with Barham, and I think that ultimately he's going to come across way as a guy who we're talking about in sort of the late day 2, early day 3 range in terms of like linebackers.
Unfortunately, we were dealing with some technical difficulties, so the rest of the recording was paused and stalled and very glitchy. So instead, I'm just going to record over some paused faces. That's Team Bruce. I'm Michael Rochman. Thank you guys for watching our Edge Sleeper episode and linebackers, of course. Tomorrow, we'll be releasing our defensive backs discourse, talking about some of the top guys and some sleepers in this class. That's Team Bruce. I'm Michael Rochman, and that's the 2-minute drill. Thanks for watching.